What's up, folks? Casual Dad here with our next Warhammer Combat Cards Warlord deck building guide. And today we're going to talk about the guy whose name I am constantly forgetting in the last few videos, and I'm really sorry about that. So this is Zephyrblade, the Craftworld same, I'm going to get that wrong, Craftworld Autarch. And I'm just going to call him Windsword from now on, because that's somehow easier to remember, even though Zephyrblade is very memorable. Now, I love Eldari. I've always loved the Autarch model, since they were Eldar. And this is one of the newer Autarch models, so I love just looking at it. It's just a cool looking thing. But I just did the guide for Tolmaron, and so I'm going to do something similar with Zephyrblade, because he's another one of the warlords that I personally recommend for newer players. So I'm going to look at a fairly scary Zephyrblade deck that I run myself, but then also kind of talk about how I started with him. But before we jump into that, we got to cover his abilities. His stats are okay. His biggest claim to fame being both the 20 squad points, so he's fairly cheap. He also, or deck points, excuse me. Okay hit points, not great on the low end, but relatively high for his cost. And then he's got decent attack stats, actually, especially at high level, especially with that inspiring presence, that ranged ready, and then also his trait, which is when any card is destroyed, all of your Eldari cards, including those in your deck, gain +3 ranged attack. Now, generally speaking, I consider the plus percentages to be stronger, especially for a higher level warlord and deck. But one of the things that makes Zephyrblade stand out is it's every single card, including those still in your deck. It's any card killed, not just a friendly, not just an enemy. And it stacks just non-stop. So if you get a good matchup against, say, like just a deck filled with endless cards, then you will have a great day. But if not, I mean, it can still kind of trigger itself. So there's a couple different ways to look at this. For me personally, I tend to run full decks, just have a couple chaff cards in there that can hit very, very hard because of his ability, but also just are there to kind of pump that ability and fill board space and also screen for your more powerful hitters. So you can see here the majority of my deck is actually commons. Common, one rare, and then I've got the 2 epics and the legendary, and those are incredibly powerful cards, especially with a Zephyrblade ability. But you can do a very strong Zephyrblade without them, and I want to make sure to highlight that because the ability is pretty agnostic and just goes whenever. Now, again, like I said, percentage-based abilities like Tolmaron's are usually stronger later game because they have a higher bonus to more powerful cards. If your base is higher, then the percentage will do more. But the flip side of that is it's actually worse for cards that have weaker attack stats. So if you have a ranged attack of like 6, then you're actually going to get better benefit from the flat +3 than you will by 20%. So Zephyrblade is actually better for kind of your cheaper mid-range shooting cards, and leveled out across a full deck has a higher bonus than Tolmaron does, especially because the cards don't have to be on the board to get the bonus. But still, I will say there is a bit of a fall-off. One of the things that makes Zephyrblade so good starting out is he's really good at amplifying your low-level cards to make up for their low stats by just giving them a flat increased stat buff. Whereas Tolmaron with the percent, again, doesn't apply as much to your weaker cards. So there's kind of a flip side to that. The downside, though, is at upper level play, Tolmaron's ability really goes off the chain, where if you get kind of higher up in the game, higher level, you get higher in the ladder. The biggest advantage of Zephyrblade is that he's cheap, and you can fill with a lot of other ranged cards. But to end the game, that he has a in-theme ranged ready is also a very powerful piece to use with him. And then also that he has that inspiring presence. Both of those things taken in combination with his trait give you some real late game haymakers. And I do kind of want to make sure to emphasize that. In terms of deck building, that's a tricky balance. One of the places that I struggle both with Tolmaron and Zephyrblade the most is those decks that can take a hit on a single target and not care. Like if there's a 10 health endless in front of you, it doesn't matter if you hit it for 400 damage. If it's an Acheron card, it doesn't matter if you hit it for 400 damage, it still comes back, and then it's still gumming up your works. So he is a really good one to consider having Barrage. I've got that Psionic Blast in there, and one day I will finally get Mogan Ra to get that Barrage. And even rank 1 Barrage with Mogan Ra, especially with that precision shot, will make all the difference in the world. So he's definitely one to keep an eye on. But in terms of deck building, if we're looking at your commons, if you have mostly commons, they're leveling up fairly quickly. I would take this guy as kind of a default mainstay card. And I did mention earlier, I don't think I finished that. There is a bit of a fall off where later in the game, your cards get high enough attack stats that that +3, even if you get it a bunch over time, is less impactful, but it's not nothing. I do want to make sure that you don't completely discount the ability because it is still good. It's just not as good as it was in early levels when it compensated for lower level cards. So like this guy, you add 15 damage from 5 cards killed. That's not nothing, especially with Barrage. That amplifies the added damage. So Barrage cards really get the biggest benefit from Zephyrblade because it boosts their base damage and their splash damage. Precision Shot, Barrage, anything that does extra ranged attacks will further amplify the bonus damage you're doing. Big Game Hunter, that's another one where you get both the flat damage increase and then also get the increased damage from the trait. So it's plus the flat and the percent, so you get the best of both worlds on that if you're shooting the correct target. You do still want to be wary of cost, though. The Sorrow of Amonroth coming in as one of the most expensive cards in the Eldari field, and you do have to get it up to level 8 to get it where that base damage is really where it's going to make an impact. Now, at lower level tiers, it's not going to matter as much. Even that 88, even the base 76 is still not nothing. It's definitely something to keep in mind as like a very scary piece. But once you start getting up to 12 and higher, this thing is just a total beast in any deck, but particularly good in a Zephyrblade deck, Windsword deck. And I wanted to make sure to highlight that one because it is common, so you should have an easy time farming copies of that once you get your first one. You do have to be fairly high level to get drops for it, so it is one to look out for. But you can also kind of live in the 20, 30 points range, and every single card in this cluster is a super strong piece with Zephyrblade. These guys here, absolutely exceptional. This guy here, really, really good. Both commons, both synergize really well with his ability, and one has the range ready, one has Barrage. Those are really good ones to include. And then, of course, you can dip into your rares a little bit. You can get that Outflank, Inspire. Of these, this guy's going to be easier to level, but he doesn't really have a ranged focus. It doesn't have a really high ranged attack stat. The Exiled Prince is a little bit better, especially as you get higher level with that Inspiring Presence, but also doesn't have a huge ranged attack stat. You kind of put him in there for that Inspiring Presence because Eldar doesn't have a ton of access to that, especially in your ranged cards. Getting up here a little bit, you can actually include cards like the Shadow Seer, just to have a variety of attacks. If your base damage is 8, that every single +3 you get to your ranged attack is going to seriously count and make this guy much more of a shooting threat over the course of the game, in addition to having just a shielded block that you're going to sit in there, and then also that outflank when you get to higher level. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. Don't feel just kind of pinned down to a specific build. One of the cooler things about Zephyrblade is that he's really, really flexible because Eldari has a lot of cards in very different price ranges, and a lot of them are really heavily range focused. You can see how I would also fairly certainly recommend a little bit of target acquired, so you can clear target cards and kind of get through tar pits and make sure that you're doing the best there. This guy's a really great piece because of fear, just kind of whatever you put in there. There isn't really a wrong choice with Zephyrblade, which is kind of fun, but you do want to be sure to mix in a little bit of durability because he can be a little bit glassy, and despite the overwhelming firepower he gets, you can get bogged down. Now I've talked a lot. We're going to go ahead and jump in and do a couple games here. I'm going to do the usual 2. This is a good time to do this because I'm at about the 2K range, so we should see decent matchups. I should completely flatten opposing decks depending on what we're up against. What do we got? Stormlord. Cool. Okay. This should be a good one. We'll see what he's got. I'm assuming it's going to be a bit of a soup. Might have some melee, might have some range. In terms of play, okay, so we got, yeah, Seamet, obvious choice. So we are going to throw this guy in here to go ahead and start clearing those shields with that Psionic Blast. Ooh, bummer. Keep these alive. There's also kind of a tricky philosophy balance, or a tricky balance to have in play with Zephyrblade. You do kind of want to lead with your hardest hitting cards because those ones are the ones that will be the most impactful early game. So you'll get the biggest benefit there. And that was just Psychic. It is nice to have a little bit of a mix of attack types just so you have an option to do something besides shooting in case you need to. In this case, I didn't really want to shoot this guy because he would shoot me right back. But I should comfortably take him out this time, and nothing else is really going to shoot back. But if you lead with a mix of your heaviest hitters, that's a really good strategy to play because that lets you tank up, clear some opposing cards, and also build up the attack bonus for your cheaper cards. So then your like 6 and 7 point cards can actually do very significant damage when they actually hit the board. This is exactly what you don't want. You don't want something like that to pop up and just nuke you. I got lucky in levels here. If that was a 1 level higher or he had a ready on range, that could have comfortably killed my heavy hitter here, which does beef up my range attack stat for my surviving cards, but isn't exactly, I don't want to lose this yet, which I'm about to anyway, but. In terms of deck building in general, you also want to keep in mind, ooh, that's a bummer. you also want to keep in mind what kind of ready types you have, so that in a pinch, if I was ranged deck versus ranged deck, you want your ready to be appropriate, where it can either seriously beef up your ranged offense, or it can really beef up your opponent, or let's see, we're looking at these. Just as somehow it can benefit. Well, let's go ahead and pop this guy in here, why not? You over 100? Yeah, okay. Oh, there it is. Oh, love it. This thing is just such a monster. And of course it's legendary, of course it's a powerful card. It's very expensive, very rare, so I am very pleased to have a high level one. I'm making this guide assuming that you don't necessarily have one of these, but if you get the opportunity to pick one up, that's one of the more impactful cards in the Eldari faction. So if you can get these two guys leveled up, that will give you a lot of flexibility for every single Eldari warlord, including the ones that aren't really ranged focused. But of course, better with the ranged focused ones, which is 3, arguably, of the Eldari warlords. Pew pew laser beams. And you can see here how things like taunt and shields are actively slowing me down. We've had 3 shielded cards on the board, and that's definitely kept my progress a little bit slower. But you can see the sheer overwhelming firepower that Zephyrblade can roll out does still kind of give me a very steady progression. And I'm kind of hoping that he is able, and he will be able to, okay. Kind of hoping that he's able to really take out my cards here, so you can see some of the quote-unquote weaker cards and as they get ramped up in a Zephyrblade deck. We've already got this guy, this 4-point regen thing throwing 50 range damage. That is no joke, which is great. But these guys here throwing 73, like these are 6-point cards, and they've got precision shot. You should not discount those, and that's one edge against a tar pit warlord like Necrons do very good tar pits. The more bodies they put in your way, the stronger your cards are going to be in the endgame. So here, my warlord's not even going to touch the table, and I'm just going to completely nuke this guy. 53 damage on the drop for a 6-point card. Seth Buin may not even get to fire here. Yeah, he still will, but look at 82-79. So that this is still a fairly high-level Zephyrblade deck, and I wanted to make sure to highlight that, where a lot of people talk about how Zephyrblada's ability is flat and doesn't really help later in the game. That's not strictly true. It doesn't have the same level of benefit, but it still is a very, very good ability, even if you're later in the game or kind of upper level. So certainly keep Zephyrblade in mind in your back pocket. I'm going to do one more game here like I've been doing, and then we will see if I can get a bad matchup and see how that goes. But yeah, and I think I mentioned this, but just in case I haven't before, Zephyrblade was one of my first truly successful warlords in the latter period, especially with Eldari, which is one of my favorite factions. He's very, very good at helping shore up a low-level kind of limited card collection. We're going to go start with the old punchy. Should easily punch right through that and have the extra healing. Yeah, okay. Should have switched those. I don't think Mogan Ra's precision shot is going to be high enough to take out the guy on the right, but it might be. Especially with that kill from Seth Buin adding an extra 3 to his base. Yeah, nice, look at that. And like most Eldari decks, this one tends to have high initiative and will tend to shoot first, which is great. So I just gained +9 attack damage to all of my cards and took almost no damage back in return. So really, really powerful Alpha Strike. And unlike some of the other deck buff warlords, because this also applies to the cards in my deck, not just the ones on the board, that was a benefit that will last me through the entire game. So it isn't something that was one and done, where it just helped the cards on the board and then I have to build back from that. So one of the cooler things about the ability is it has a nice long sustain on it. So I can continue to build on the success of my early game, even in the late game. Which is one of the challenging things about playing against Zephyrblade. One of the key things is you want to kill his cards without losing yours, which of course, obvious, right? But it can be tricky because a lot of the AI will usually feed you the weaker cards first, and then you end up with the supercharged, really powerful hitters in the endgame. Which isn't the worst thing in the world, because that does give you time to build the board and gives you momentum in the game, so you actually have a fairly decent chance of pulling out Zephyrblade. But it does mean you want to be careful about not losing your cards too early, because then you will have a serious disadvantage when the Crimson Hunter drops, when Mogan Ra drops, who are very, very common includes in your Zephyrblade decks. Splat. Okay, so that was not a tougher matchup. Those were both really quick, which is another thing I really enjoy about Zephyrblade, because he's got such high early attack that then just keeps ramping up. He's got that ramp. He's got that initial fight. He does shoot first. He ends up being a very fast warlord to play. So if you're in a decent spot, you want to progress quickly up the ladder, and you have Zephyrblade on hand, some decent cards, he's a really good one to pick just to kind of cruise through the game. We're going to do one more. Again, this is kind of a new player focused one. I wanted to spend some extra time on Zephyrblade because he's very flexible, he's fun, he's cool, he's one of my favorites. And then also he is a particularly good one for new players. And these guides are not strictly new player focused, but the idea is for them to be very helpful for new players. This is a bad matchup. Okay, here we go. We got it. This is a tricky one because the better you do, the more it will hurt you. Ooh. And that's a terrible draw. Downside to having... It's not that bad. Downside to having a full deck. Sometimes you get bad draws. This isn't that bad. Morgan Ra has a decent chance of taking out Hicks over here, who would be a lot more dangerous to any of my other heavy hitters. And I mean, this one I'm starting right out of the gate with my heaviest punchy cards. They will probably die. But again, the good news being I still will have a lot of legs in the endgame just because I have so much like passive ranged buffing. But do I have the hit points to tank the bonus attacks that he's going to nail me with? She's going to nail me with, pardon. Like this, thematic, mostly sisters. Canoness is a really, really powerful warlord, and one of the ones that hilariously is hilariously well positioned to just punish you for doing too well too early. And then we'll see if that takes out my buddy. Nice. That worked out. Although, gonna die anyway. Ugh. Alright, so just as like a pulse check here, and this is one of those funny things too. Okay, my goal is to take out big chunker in the middle there. Oh, come on. Brutal. Got that taunt. I should have expected that, of course, because that's a piece that one would expect here. I should be still set up here, but there is a risk. Zephyrblade is in a spot to very nearly one-shot Canoness over there, but has to not take the bonus hit when I kill this thing. I took it. Bummer. But was going to probably die in the range attack anyway, so that's all right. Oof! Okay, now we're going to heal up. And this is tricky. So this is good. I wanted to have kind of a tougher matchup here. All right, I see you. And we're going to do this precision shot to take this guy down. And then the Medicaid was just enough to top Morgan Ra off, so he's not going to die in the melee, even if I had that bonus hit. Oh, ouch. What level is that? Okay. So if I take this Inspiring Presence off the board, that'll be much less of a concern. Ooh, man. Okay. I think calling it now, I'm pretty sure she's got me. Just because of the bonus attacks and the volume of melee hits I'm about to take, I may have this, but I am not confident that I'll have enough power to punch through Canoness's shields in the endgame. And this is a bummer where playing my hard hitters first really, really hurt me. So I'm going to have to play it safe. Oh, good. Okay, so nothing really scary, but I'm going to take a wipe. Not a complete wipe, but close enough. And then every single kill I get from here on out is chances to be a penitent engine against old Windsword himself. So I'm going to lose this. This is a tough match. This, again, is one of those where the better you're doing offensively, the worse you are hit back. This could possibly, if both of these hit Zephyrblade, then I will just lose on my own turn. There it is. Okay, so... yeah, there you go. So now you've seen a bad matchup too. Hopefully that was really helpful kind of understanding the depth of breadth of Zephyrblade. Very cool warlord. Again, one of my favorites. Hopefully from now on people start calling him Windsword. That'll make me chuckle every time. But hopefully this is helpful. I'm going to continue doing this series, so stay tuned for more. Thank you, and until next time.